It was the kind of cold that crept into your bones and stayed there. The kind that made even a strong man feel small. And for Sarah, it made her feel like she didn't belong in her own skin. She stood on the edge of the small, dust-blown town of Carter Ridge, a thin coat wrapped around her too tight belly, the seams straining with every breath. Her shoes were soaked, the leather cracked, barely holding together. She had walked nearly 15 miles in 2 days, stopping only when the cramping in her stomach made her double over. The baby was coming, sooner than she'd hoped. Sarah wasn't running from one man. She was running from the memory of too many. She hadn't always been this way. Desperate, tired, ready to fall apart. There was a time when her life was simple. Before the war took her brother. Before the sickness took her ma. Before the man she trusted most used her up and left her with nothing but shame and a growing belly. Carter Ridge was never meant to be a destination. It was just a name on a map, the next place down the trail where maybe, just maybe, someone might show her kindness. Or at least not turn her away. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the shadows stretched long over the dirt road when she finally knocked on the door of the cabin at the far end of town. She hadn't planned what to say. She never did. Words never came easy when she needed them most. Her voice cracked from cold and thirst. "Please," she said, barely louder than a whisper, "just one night indoors." The man who opened the door didn't speak at first. He looked like he'd forgotten how. His face was all angles and quiet. Wide shoulders, beard streaked with gray, eyes that didn't blink quick. He stared at her belly before meeting her eyes. "Storm's coming," he finally said, his voice low and dry like with smoke. Then, without asking more, he stepped aside. Inside, the air was thick with heat from the stove, and for a second, Sarah thought she might cry from just standing in it. The man moved slow and quiet, like someone who didn't talk unless he had to. He poured her a tin cup of water and left it on the table, then sat across the room with his boots near the fire. His name was Eli, she learned later. A widower, a rancher with no ranch left. The land had dried up 2 years back. All he had now was this cabin and the ghost that lived in it. She didn't ask about the woman in the picture on the mantel, or the worn dress folded neatly by the bed. She could tell by the way Eli looked at nothing when he sat still. He was already living with her in his mind. That night, Sarah lay on the bed and tried not to move too much. The mattress was soft, smelled of cedar and dust, and her back ached something fierce. Eli had taken the floor without a word, wrapped in a blanket, his breathing steady and slow. She wanted to ask him why he let her in. Men like him didn't open doors to women like her, not without wanting something. But he hadn't touched her, hadn't looked at her the way other men did. That unsettled her more than if he had. What did he see in her? A woman swollen with another man's child, trembling and half-starved. Sarah turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes, thinking about how she'd ended up here. How one night at a harvest dance, 3 towns over had led to a promise, then a mistake, then silence. How she'd waited for a letter that never came. How her belly started to swell before winter, and how the neighbors started to look at her sideways. She tried to stay at her aunt's, but the woman had 6 mouths to feed already and no patience for trouble girls. She spent the next months sleeping in barns and under trees, sometimes trading sewing work for a hot meal. She didn't complain, not out loud, but inside, the anger lived heavy in her chest. At the man who left, at the world that shrugged when girls like her vanished from sight. At herself, most of all. She couldn't remember the last time someone looked her in the eye and meant it. Until Eli. He was different. Not soft, but not cruel either. He watched her like a man who knew what it was to lose something and didn't want to lose again. The wind howled through the cracks in the window that night, and the stove hissed as the fire died down. Sarah's hands clutched her stomach when another wave of pain rolled through her. She breathed through it, quiet as she could. It wasn't time. Not yet. Maybe if she could sleep, it'd pass. Maybe she could wait one more day. Eli stirred but didn't look up. just rolled onto his side and faced the wall like a man used to not being needed. In the stillness, Sarah remembered her ma's hands, calloused, cracked, always moving. Braiding hair, kneading dough, patching clothes. Her ma would have known what to do now. She would have boiled water, wrapped sheets, whispered steady words. But Sarah only had silence, and the baby inside her that refused to wait. She didn't want to bring it into the world like this. Not in a stranger's bed. Not when she didn't even have a name picked out. But the baby didn't care about all that. The baby wanted out. And as another pain stabbed deep through her belly, Sarah knew she wouldn't be walking anywhere come morning. Whatever happened next, she had no choice but to face it right here with a man who still hadn't asked who she was. She didn't know yet that Eli had a past he didn't speak of, that the photo on the mantel wasn't just a memory, but a wound he kept from healing. She didn't know how many nights he'd sat by that fire hoping for someone to knock, even if he'd never admit it. She didn't know that by the time the sun came up, she'd no longer be a stranger in this house. She'd be a mother. And Eli would no longer be a man alone, whether he wanted to be or not. Sarah didn't remember falling asleep, only that she woke up choking on the pain. The fire had burned down low, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. Her whole body was slick with sweat. The pain came faster now, sharper, like it was carving something out of her. She barely had the strength to cry out. Eli was up in seconds, the blanket still tangled around his legs, his face pale but calm. He didn't ask questions, just said, "I'm getting the midwife," and was out the door before Sarah could respond. Within an hour, he returned with an older woman, a midwife named Mary, her face weathered but steady, carrying a small bag of supplies. Mary moved with quiet efficiency, laying out towels, boiling water, and speaking in a low, calm voice. "It's all right, girl. You're not alone." Sarah didn't believe her, not really. But in that moment, she let her take charge. Mary guided her through each contraction, her hands firm and practiced, while Eli stood by the door, his eyes fixed on the floor, ready to help if needed. By the time the sun broke through the frost-tinted window, a girl lay bundled in Sarah's arms, crying so softly it barely sounded real. Sarah stared down at the newborn's face and felt everything at once. Fear, wonder, emptiness, love. It hit her so hard her chest hurt. She looked up at Eli, who stood near the door, his face unreadable, and Mary, who was quietly packing her things. "You can name her," Eli said after a long silence. Sarah shook her head. "She's not yours." He nodded slowly. "Still, she's here now." She thought of calling her Ruth after her mother, but the name felt too heavy, too full of ghosts. Instead, she whispered June. It came out like a breath. It was the month her life had turned, when everything fell apart. But maybe now it could be something else. Mary gave a small nod of approval before leaving without much talk, promising to check in later. For the first 2 days, no one came to the cabin. Sarah stayed in bed, holding June close, trying to nurse, trying to sleep. Eli worked quietly outside, chopping wood, feeding the chickens, doing things that made the place feel less like a grave and more like a home. He brought her food without asking, left her space without pressure. But every once in a while, she caught him looking, not at her, but at June, like he wanted to hold her but didn't trust himself to. On the third morning, someone knocked. Eli answered, and Sarah tensed, clutching June to her chest. The voice that came through was sharp, impatient. "You didn't come to town again. Sheriff sent me. Thought you'd frozen to death." It was a woman, older, with a braid of gray blonde hair and a tone that didn't allow for lies. She stepped inside without asking. "And who's this?" she said, eyes narrowing as they landed on Sarah. "This is Sarah," Eli said simply. "She's resting." Sarah didn't speak. She didn't know how to explain herself to this woman who clearly didn't miss much. The woman stared a moment longer, then sighed. "I'm Hetty. I run the general store. I bring him food when he forgets he's got a stomach." Which is often. Sarah tried to sit up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause, didn't ask for sorry," Hetty cut in. Then, gentler, just wondering what you and that baby are doing here. This cabin ain't a halfway house. Eli stepped between them. She needed help. I help. Hetty raised a brow. You sure you know what you're doing, Eli? That girl's got secrets written all over her face. Sarah flinched. She didn't mean to. Hetty noticed. Didn't say it to be cruel. Just know how this town works. They smell weakness. They won't be kind. Sarah nodded. I'm not staying long. You say that now, Hetty muttered, looking at June. But you got a newborn. And no one out there waiting for you. I bet. No one responded. By the time Hetty left, Sarah knew two things. The town wasn't going to let her slip by unseen, and Hetty would be back. Not out of kindness, but because she didn't trust Sarah. And that was fair. Sarah didn't trust herself either. Later that week, another visitor came, not to the cabin, but while Sarah was walking the edge of the property with June swaddled against her chest. A young man rode up on a pale horse, clean boots, confident posture. His coat was too fine for trail work. He didn't dismount. You the girl staying with Eli? He asked, eyes scanning her like she was inventory. Sarah nodded. You related? No, he smirked. Didn't think so. Name's Tom Avery. My uncle owns the lumber mill in town. We don't get many strangers around here. She said nothing. You got a husband coming? No. He leaned on the horn of his saddle. That your kid? Sarah's arms tightened. Yes. Tom's smile turned sharp. Some people might think you're taking advantage of Eli. He's not right in the head since his wife passed. Lets in a stranger. Lets her stay. People start talking. I'm not taking anything, she said, the words shaking but clear. He helped me. That's all. Tom nodded slowly. You keep telling yourself that. He turned his horse and left without another word. That night, Sarah told Eli. He didn't react much, just stirred the stew and said, Tom's mouth is bigger than his brain. Ignore him. But Sarah could tell it bothered him. Not the insult, the truth underneath it. People in town would start asking questions, maybe even coming around. And if anyone recognized her face, if news of what she'd done reached Carter Ridge, she and June wouldn't be safe here either. Because she had done something she hadn't spoken of. Not to Eli, not even to herself out loud. The baby's father wasn't just some boy who disappeared. He was a man with a wife in another town. A preacher's son. The kind of man who didn't like hearing no and made sure she understood what happened to girls who talked too much. The kind of man who wouldn't stop until she vanished. She had fought back. Too hard, maybe. She had left him bleeding in the barn, crawled out the side window, and never looked back. Now, every knock on the door made her heart race. Every unfamiliar voice felt like it could tear her world apart. And still she stayed, because June needed milk, and warmth, and a place where no one raised their voice. Weeks passed. Snow came early that year, blanketing the hills in silence. Sarah began helping around the cabin, sewing patches on Eli's shirts, sweeping the dust from the corners, boiling herbs for her cracked hands. She didn't ask, didn't try to earn her keep, but the work gave her something to do besides worry. Eli watched her more now, quietly, without judgment. But he didn't ask about her past. Didn't offer his either. One night, while June slept, Sarah finally asked, what happened to her? Eli stared at the fire. Fever. Took her fast. Year later, the baby followed. Same sickness. He didn't say more, and she didn't press. After that, something shifted. Not romance. Not yet, but a trust. A closeness. Then Hetty returned, this time with a tin of preserves and a letter. Sheriff's office up north sent word, she said. Looking for a girl, traveling alone. Matches your description. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did the letter say? Didn't read it. Not my place. Gave it to Eli. Sarah turned to him. His hand gripped the letter too tightly. They're saying you hurt someone, he said, voice low. That you ran. Sarah's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I did, because he was going to kill me. No one spoke for a long time. Hetty finally sighed. Well, if it's true, you'll need more than Eli's quiet to keep you safe. Town's full of people who love a scandal. That was the first time Sarah realized it wasn't just strangers she had to fear. It was the way secrets fed themselves in a small town. And hers was growing teeth. The sky over Carter Ridge turned the color of old bruises. Clouds hung low, pressing against the hills like they were too heavy to move. Sarah felt the weight of them in her chest. Something was changing. She could feel it in the way Eli's hands paused longer over his coffee, in the way Hetty's visits grew shorter, in the way June had started waking in the night, crying for reasons Sarah couldn't fix. The world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then it did. The sheriff rode into town just after dusk, his coat still dusted with snow from the North Pass. He was tall, lean, and didn't smile when folks waved. Sarah saw him from the edge of the window, her breath catching the glass. Eli stepped behind her quietly. "Don't panic yet," he said, but his jaw was clenched. Sheriff Lowell wasn't a man who liked to repeat himself. He went straight to Hetty's, had coffee, then walked over to the saloon like he owned the floorboards. By nightfall, everyone in Carter Ridge had heard the same thing. He was looking for a woman with dark hair, light eyes, and a baby about 3 weeks old. She was wanted for questioning in an attempted murder case upstate. Sarah didn't need to ask who they were talking about. "I never tried to kill him," she whispered that night. "I was trying to get away. He cornered me." Eli sat at the table, his hands steepled beneath his chin. "You sure he didn't die?" Sarah's voice broke. "I don't know. He wasn't moving, but I didn't wait around to find out." She expected judgment, or at least distance. But Eli only looked tired. "I've killed a man," he said quietly, "in the war, and I still see his face sometimes." That was the first time Sarah cried in front of him. Not soft, not polite, but hard and shaking and ugly. Eli didn't say a word, just sat there while June whimpered in her arms, confused and helpless like her mother. For a few days, it felt like the world might keep moving without crushing them. Sheriff Lowell asked around, but Sarah stayed inside. Hetty didn't say anything to him. Neither did the two ranch hands who sometimes passed Eli's land. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just didn't care. But it didn't matter, because Tom Avery came back. He arrived mid-afternoon, just as the snow started falling again, his coat slick and dark, his eyes sharp. Sarah saw him ride up and tried to stay calm, but he didn't even knock. He pushed open the door and stepped inside like he had a right to. Well, he said, looking at June. "Ain't she just a picture?" Eli stood. "Get out, Tom." Tom didn't flinch. "Sheriff's asking around. I just thought I'd be helpful. Turns out someone up north's offering a bounty for a girl matching her description. Pretty generous one, too." Sarah's stomach turned to lead. "I figure," Tom went on, "I tell them where she is. Maybe I get a little extra. But I'm not greedy. I like bargains. So here's mine." Eli's voice was low. "Say what you came to say." Tom smiled. "I won't say a word. Won't breathe a thing. But she comes with me. Just for a few months. Enough time for the law to get bored." Sarah went cold. She knew men like Tom. Knew what he meant without him needing to say it. "You lay a hand on her," Eli said, "and I'll put you in the ground." Tom laughed. "You think anyone care? You've been holed up here like a hermit. Ain't got a friend left in town." Sarah stepped forward. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking. Tom tipped his hat. "You're making a mistake." And then he was gone. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. Neither did Eli. They sat at the table with the oil lamp flickering between them, June sleeping in the crook of Sarah's arm. The wind howled outside, and inside everything felt like it might tear apart. "I can't stay," Sarah said softly. "If he tells the sheriff, I'll be taken. I won't let that happen. You can't stop it." Eli rubbed his hand over his beard. "You think running again will help? I don't know what else to do." But fate made the decision for them. 2 nights later, someone lit a fire behind the cabin. The smoke woke Sarah first. She grabbed June and ran for the door, coughing, eyes burning. Eli was already outside, stamping out the flames with a wet sack. It didn't spread far, snow helped, but it was meant as a message, not destruction. Pinned to the door was a note. "You've got until sunrise. After that, I collect what's mine." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Eli paced the floor, after putting the fire out. He's not going to sheriff. He wants control. Fear. I've dealt with that kind before. I know, he said, and I think I have a way to stop him. Sarah stared. How? Eli didn't answer right away. I'm going into town. What? No, you'll only make it worse. He looked at her, eyes fierce. He's betting on your fear. He's not expecting someone to stand up. She wanted to argue, but she saw it in his face. He wasn't asking. Eli left before dawn. When he returned, there was blood on his shirt. Sarah ran to him. What happened? Tom won't be a problem, he said simply. Her stomach turned. Did you? No, but I made sure he understands what happens if he threatens you again. He never told her exactly what was said, only that Tom left Carter Ridge that same day, riding north, and didn't look back. But it didn't end there, because 2 days later, Sheriff Lowell knocked on their door. Eli answered, blocking Sarah from view. I heard there was a woman staying here, the sheriff said. Girl with a child. Matches the wanted poster. She's here, Eli said, and she's not going anywhere. Sarah stepped out then, heart hammering. If you're here to take me, do it. But at least let me explain. The sheriff didn't draw his weapon, just looked at her, then down at the baby. You defended yourself, he said after a long pause. That's what the report says. What the local law wouldn't say out loud. Sarah blinked. Then why are you here? Because men like the one you hurt don't stay down long. And they got families with money. And influence. Word is he's still alive. Limping. Angry. And he's looking. Sarah felt the ground slip. So what do I do? She asked. The sheriff took off his hat. You don't run. You build roots. You get people to stand beside you. That's the only thing that keeps men like that away. He looked at Eli. And from what I hear, you've already started. Then he turned and walked away. That night, Sarah sat on the porch with June in her lap, watching the stars come out one by one. The cold was sharp, but she didn't feel it as much anymore. Eli stepped beside her, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. You could still leave, he said, if you wanted. I don't, she whispered. For the first time, I don't. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the snow kept falling. And for once, Sarah felt like maybe the storm had passed. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the middle, the part where things started to grow. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't over. The man who hurt her was still out there, and men like him didn't forget. Still, she had something now she hadn't before. Someone who'd stand in front of her. A roof that didn't leak. A baby who smiled in her sleep. And the strength to stop running. Whatever came next, she'd face it. Right here, at home. The days that followed Sheriff Lowell's visit were quiet, but not in the peaceful way. It was a waiting kind of silence. Like something unspoken hovered just out of reach, heavy and growing. Sarah moved through the cabin like someone half awake, eyes always darting to the window, heart never quite at rest. The sheriff's warning rang in her head every time she laid June down to sleep. He's still out there. And he's looking. Eli noticed, of course. He didn't say anything at first, just worked harder, chopping more wood than they needed, fixing things that hadn't yet broken. But his silence was its own language. He was preparing for something. They both were. Because no matter how far north Sarah had run, danger had followed. And she was starting to believe it always would. The town didn't forget either. Word of the sheriff's visit had spread, and even though no one said Sarah's name outright, she could feel the shift in every look. When she went to the general store, conversations paused. When she stepped into the chapel for warmth with June, people moved a little farther down the pew. Hetty stayed loyal, but even she grew more cautious, more watchful of the townsfolk. You've got to be careful, she said one morning as Sarah gathered baby blankets off the line. A town this small, people don't forget whispers, and they don't need proof to pick a side. Sarah looked down at her hands, raw, red from scrubbing and cold, and swallowed her pride. I didn't ask for sides. I just want quiet. A life. Hetty sighed. Most women do. Doesn't mean we get it. At night, the walls seemed thinner. Sarah and Eli sat at opposite ends of the table more often than not. They talked less. The closeness they found in those early weeks when he'd fetch the midwife while she gave birth, when she mended his shirts and he tucked June's blanket tighter. It had started to fray. Not because of anything spoken, but because fear wedges itself between people, makes them question what's real and what's safe. Sarah could feel him pulling away, even as he stayed near. Then came the letter. It arrived in Hetty's hands, sealed with a mark Sarah knew too well. The family crest of the man who had made her life hell. The preacher's son. Hetty hesitated before handing it over. It's addressed to you. No one else saw it. Sarah took it with shaking fingers. Inside, the words were brief. Cold. Measured. You can't hide behind cowards and widowers forever. I will see you again. One way or another. No signature. Just the weight of the threat, as sharp as a knife between her ribs. That night, Sarah broke. She sat at the edge of the bed and told Eli everything. Not just what she'd done, but why, how it started, what he did, what he took. The way her voice trembled wasn't from fear, it was from shame. Shame that didn't belong to her, but still clung like dirt under her fingernails. When she was done, Eli didn't speak right away. He just leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face pale. I knew you were running, he said, but I didn't know that. She tried to meet his eyes. I understand if you want me gone. His voice cracked. I don't want you gone. He stood, hands on his hips, looking anywhere but at her. I feel like I failed you, letting you carry all that alone. You didn't fail me, she said quietly. You saved me. He looked at her then, eyes red-rimmed. I don't know how to protect you from this. I don't need you to protect me, she said. I just need you to stay. But staying wasn't easy. The letter changed everything. Eli started sleeping with his rifle leaned against the wall. He made trips into town and didn't say why. He built a stronger fence around the front of the property and started talking about moving. Somewhere farther, somewhere quieter. Sarah didn't argue, but she knew deep down that distance wouldn't save them. Fear would follow, just like it always had. June began fussing more often. She cried at night, long and inconsolable, and Sarah's nerves frayed. Her body ached with the constant tension. Her mind raced even in sleep. She started seeing shadows out of place, hearing sounds that weren't there. Every knock on the door, every creak of wood, her breath caught in her throat. And then, one night, Eli didn't come home. He'd gone into town for supplies, said he'd be back by dusk. But night fell and still no sign. Sarah sat by the window with June on her lap, staring into the dark until her eyes blurred. When she couldn't take it anymore, she wrapped June up, strapped her against her chest, and stepped out into the snow. The trail into Carter Ridge felt longer than usual. The wind bit at her face. Her feet slipped in the drifts. But she didn't stop until she saw the glow of lanterns ahead. The saloon was still open, barely. Hetty was there, mopping the floor, and she turned when Sarah stumbled in. Where is he? Sarah asked. Her voice was hoarse, her hair tangled with snow. Hetty's expression told her everything. He's with the sheriff. Sarah's heart stopped. What? I don't know exactly. But something happened outside the store. A man, stranger, showed up asking about you. Eli confronted him. There was shouting. Sheriff took them both in. Without thinking, Sarah turned and ran. The sheriff's office was dimly lit, quiet. Sheriff Lowell stood outside, arms crossed. He raised an eyebrow as she approached. You bringing the baby into the middle of this too? He asked, not unkindly. I need to see him. Lowell sighed and opened the door. Inside, Eli sat on a bench, a cut over his brow, his hands stained with dry blood. Sarah dropped to her knees in front of him. What happened? I recognized the man. He was one of his cousins. Asking around. I told him to leave. He didn't. Things got loud. Lowell stepped in. No charges. Not yet. But it's clear word's gotten out. And you've got two choices now. Leave quietly or stand and make a case. Sarah looked up. What kind of case? Lowell's eyes softened. One where people testify. Tell what really happened to you. So the law up north has no reason to come hunting. It sounded impossible. Terrifying. But something inside her shifted. Maybe it was June's weight against her chest. Maybe it was Eli's bruised face. Maybe it was just exhaustion. "I'm tired of running," she whispered. Eli nodded slowly. "Then we don't run." But the days that followed tested them more than either expected. Some in town supported her, mostly women, mostly quiet. Hetty stood beside her when she gave her statement to the sheriff. So did Eli, but others weren't kind. The preacher called her a liar during his sermon. Storekeepers raised their prices when she walked in. A few ranchers spit on the ground as she passed. People whispered murderous behind her back. Sarah felt the walls closing in again. One night, as she tucked June in, she broke down. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe people like me don't get peace." Eli sat beside her, his hand over hers. "People like you? Strong? Honest? Brave? No, people like you make peace." She looked at him, tears clinging to her lashes. "I don't know how." "Then let's learn together." Their relationship, forged in fear, tested by truth, began to heal, not in grand declarations, but in small, steady acts. He held June more. She cooked dinner again. They laughed, rarely but honestly. They didn't pretend everything was fine, but they started to believe it could be. Then one night, another letter arrived. But this time, it was addressed to the sheriff. The man who had hurt Sarah had been found. Dead. A stroke, they said. Alone in his father's house. The bounty was no longer valid. The law had no reason to chase Sarah anymore. She read the letter 3 times. Then she walked out into the snow, bare feet and all, and screamed into the night. Not in grief, not in fear, in release, in relief. And when she came back inside, Eli was waiting, arms open. The past hadn't vanished. The scars remained, but the weight of the chase was gone. And now, what lay ahead was finally hers to shape. Winter clung to Carter Ridge like it didn't want to let go. Snow gathered thick along the rooftops. Wind whistled through every gap in the old wood cabin, and the nights were darker than they'd ever been. But inside Eli's cabin, things were warmer than they'd been in a long while. June was sitting up on her own now, her giggles filling quiet spaces, her little hands always reaching, always searching. Sarah found herself smiling more, sometimes forgetting she was still carrying a past like a wound that never healed. For a time, it felt like maybe they'd made it through. Then, on the last day of February, a letter came. No wax seal, no threats, just a folded note left on the porch under a rock. She wasn't the only one. "Come talk. The truth's bigger than you think." There was no name, no signature, just a crude map drawn with shaky hands, leading into the hills beyond Carter Ridge. Eli stared at it a long time, brows drawn together. "You think it's a trap?" Sarah held the paper tightly, her jaw set. "If it is, they already know where to find me. I'd rather meet it on my own feet. You don't owe them anything." "I owe her," Sarah said. "The woman I used to be. The girl who thought no one else would ever understand." Eli didn't argue, but when she left the next morning, he followed at a distance. The path led to an old trapper's cabin, barely standing. The door was cracked open, smoke curling from a rusted chimney pipe. Inside sat a woman, no older than Sarah, maybe younger, eyes hollow, cheekbones sharp. A child nursed at her breast, no older than June. "You came," she said without looking up. Sarah stepped in carefully. "I got your note." The woman nodded. "I was in Red Creek." "Well, he was a deacon there. Before Carter Ridge. Before the fire." Sarah's heart stilled. "You knew him, knew what he did, what he took, and how they covered it up." Sarah sat slowly. "You too." The woman nodded. "Me and others. Some didn't survive it." The next hour passed like thunder, low and shaking. Names were spoken. Places. A list of girls, some now married, some gone, some lost to things no one wanted to speak out loud. They shared their stories like pieces of a broken mirror, each crack reflecting a different version of the same pain. "I heard what you did," the woman said finally. "What you had to do. You gave the rest of us a way to speak, to stop hiding." "I didn't mean to lead anything," Sarah said quietly. "I was just trying to live." The woman looked at her, a flicker of something almost like hope in her tired face. Sometimes living is the most dangerous thing you can do. Sarah rode back home with her heart heavier than ever. There were more of them, more stories, more girls like her who had been taught to shut up, to disappear, to survive in silence. And now, whether she wanted it or not, she was part of something bigger. But the peace she returned to didn't last long. That night, after putting June down, she found Eli sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "That man, before he came looking for you. I'd heard of him. I heard rumors. Years back after I lost Ruth. There were things in the paper. Whispers." Sarah sat beside him, her body cold all of a sudden. "And I didn't think it was real. Thought it was just angry gossip. Preacher's son, too much pride. Folks wanting to tear him down. I didn't connect the names until you told me what happened." She stared at him. "You knew." "I didn't know," Eli said, his voice tight. "But maybe I should have. Maybe I could have seen it sooner. Protected you better. Or warned someone." Sarah stood, the betrayal slicing deep. Not because he'd lied, but because he hadn't acted. Because maybe, just maybe, if someone had spoken sooner, she wouldn't have had to go through alone. "You were the first person who made me feel safe," she whispered. "And now I don't know if that was ever true." "I tried to protect you," he said. "But I'm not proud of the silence I kept." She didn't speak again that night. Just curled up beside June, her back to Eli, her heart spinning. The next few days passed like walking on splintered wood. They said little. They touched less. And Sarah couldn't decide if the wound between them could be stitched or if it would only fester. Then, Hetty showed up, breathless and shaking, with a newspaper in hand. "He's dead," she said, eyes wide. Sarah blinked. "I thought he already—" "No." Hetty cut her off. "That was a lie. A trick. The man you hurt? He'd been hiding. Faking injury. Waiting." She handed Sarah the paper. It was from a neighboring town. The headline screamed louder than any voice. "Preacher's son found dead in burning barn. Cause under investigation." The article was short. The fire had started in the middle of the night. No known cause. But underneath, in tiny print, were the names of several women who had come forward in the last month with accusations. The tide had turned. Sarah dropped the paper. Her knees gave out, but Eli caught her. "I didn't do this," she said. "I know," he said, pulling her close. "But someone had." She never found out who started the fire. Whether it was the woman in the cabin or one of the others who had lived in the shadows like she had. It didn't matter. The story was over. But its ending came at a cost. Later that night, Sarah sat across from Eli in the low firelight. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "Not yet. I understand. But I also know what silence feels like. How it eats you." He looked down at his hands. "I kept your pain safe. I just didn't know how to fix it." "I don't want you to fix it," she said. "I want you to stand beside it." He looked up, eyes full of something real. "Always." The next morning, Sarah walked into Carter Ridge with her head high, June in her arms, Eli beside her. She went to the chapel, to the same pulpit where the preacher once spoke, and took her place at the front. Hetty stood nearby. So did a few others. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just spoke. She told the truth. About what had happened. About who let it happen. About the silence that wrapped itself around girls like her. She didn't name names that didn't want to be named. She didn't seek revenge. Only light. By the time she stepped down, the room was quiet in a new way. Not uncomfortable, just stunned, and beginning to shift. That night, as snow fell soft and slow outside, Sarah sat beside Eli at the table, June chewing on her blanket in her lap. There were still things to be repaired, still wounds between them. But she wasn't running, and he wasn't hiding. "Do you still want to leave this town?" she asked. He paused. "Only if you want to." She thought a moment, then looked down at her daughter's face. "No," she said. "I think I want to build something here." And Eli, without hesitation, said, "Then we will." Maybe it wasn't a perfect ending, but it was honest. And that was enough. Spring arrived quiet and slow, like the land itself was holding its breath. The snow that had blanketed Carter Ridge for so many months finally melted, revealing earth that was bruised but not broken. Life returned in small ways: buds on trees, water in the creek, a hawk nesting near the edge of Eli's property. The world moved forward, even if the people in it still carried yesterday's weight. Sarah stood at the edge of the pasture, June on her hip, watching Eli mend the broken fence again. It had been months since the fire, months since she'd stood in the chapel and let the truth fall from her mouth like stones pulled from deep water. The town hadn't turned on her like she feared. In fact, some people started speaking too, softly at first, then louder. Other women, one man, stories that had lived in silence for years now spilled into the open. It didn't fix everything. There were still those who whispered behind closed doors, people who said things like she brought it on herself, or some things are better left in the past. But they were fewer now, and less powerful. Sarah didn't need them to believe her anymore. She'd already found the only people who mattered. She looked down at June, whose tiny hands were reaching for the wind. "You'll grow up different," she said softly. "You won't have to be afraid of someone just because they talk like God and walk like a man." Behind her, Eli approached, wiping sweat from his brow, his shirt dirty from the morning's work. "She's going to be strong," he said, placing a hand on Sarah's back. "Just like her mother." Sarah smiled but didn't answer. She just leaned into him, letting his warmth fill in the spaces where cold used to live. They still hadn't married. People asked why, sometimes, whispered about it at the general store or after church services. But Sarah didn't need a ring to know she belonged here. Eli didn't need a preacher to say he'd stand beside her. They had something deeper than ceremony, a quiet kind of loyalty, forged in fire, in silence, in the hard choices both of them had to make. Some nights, she still woke up with the weight of her past pressing down on her chest. But now, when she reached for something in the dark, there was always a hand waiting. June took her first steps the same week wildflowers started to bloom in the hills. The sight of her toddling across the kitchen floor made Sarah cry, not from sadness, but from a happiness that scared her with how sharp it felt. It was strange to feel joy again, like wearing skin that didn't quite fit, but slowly adjusting. Sarah found herself doing things she never thought she'd do again. Planting herbs in the windowsill, laughing without guilt, singing to June while doing chores. Some days were still heavy, but she had stopped apologizing for carrying that weight. One afternoon, she went back to the cemetery where the headstone still stood for her baby, the one she'd birthed on Eli's bed, the one who never cried, never saw the world. She knelt in front of the stone, her fingers brushing the name she'd etched herself. "I think I finally understand," she whispered, "why you had to come and go so fast." She didn't expect a sign, just the stillness. The peace of speaking something out loud that had stayed quiet too long. Back in town, people had started using her name again, not just whispering it. She was no longer that girl who ran. She was Sarah Morgan, the woman who stood in the chapel, the one who came back. Ironically, the man who once hunted her, preacher's son, son of influence, was now being remembered in rumors and hushed tones. His father left town quietly, resigning from the church, claiming illness. No one replaced him. The chapel remained empty. Some said it should be torn down. Others said it should be left standing as a reminder. Sarah thought about that sometimes, about the way evil could hide in plain sight, wearing kind eyes and clean shirts, about how silence made it grow stronger. She didn't hate him anymore. That would have given him too much power. What she felt now was more like a dull ache, like an old scar on a winter morning. It reminded her of what she'd survived and how far she'd come. Eli never tried to fix what he'd said or didn't say, but he showed up every day, mending things, holding her close when she couldn't sleep, teaching June how to stand. Sarah saw in him the kind of love she never believed existed. Not perfect, but steady, real. One night, after putting June to sleep, she sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars were out, bold and sharp. Eli joined her, handing her a warm mug of coffee. You think we'll ever leave this place? Sarah shook her head. This land gave me back something I thought I lost. I don't want to leave it. I want to make it better. He nodded slowly. We will. And they did. She started helping other women, quietly at first, listening, guiding, connecting them to each other. No speeches, no crowds, just presence. Like someone had finally turned on the porch light and left the door unlocked. Years from now, Sarah wouldn't be remembered just as the woman who gave birth in a stranger's bed during a snowstorm. She'd be remembered for what came after, for the way she stood up, not just for herself, but for others, for the way she turned pain into something that could heal. As for June, she'd grow up knowing her story wasn't one of shame, but of strength. And when she asked, Sarah would tell her the truth. All of it, because silence had taken enough already. That's how the story ended. Not with a wedding or a parade, but with a quiet evening, a baby sleeping safely in the next room, and a woman who had finally come home to herself. Not perfect, but whole. And that was enough.